Hello, Rays. KJ is back for the attack. I'm going to continue with this Ruth Markel book, The Unveiling. We are now on chapter 5. I appreciate everybody being patient with me and allowing me to share this book with all of y'all. You know, we've gotten some really good comments on the last two parts of this book reading. I appreciate everyone giving me feedback and really being able to see things that you see that maybe I haven't seen. So we're going now into the pre-trial life, chapter 5. Thank y'all again for listening. Although the actual trial started in 2019, due to the volume of pre-trial hearings that had transpired already, our victim impact statements were prepared well in advance. Victims of crime experience an unexpected and significant loss, causing unthinkable harm to their lives and the lives of their loved ones. Not only are victims forced to deal with sudden victimization, they often experience confusion and frustration when encountering the criminal justice system. Most victims have limited knowledge of the law, which can make court proceedings all the more concerning. This complex system of confusing rules and procedures often contribute to the victim's burden instead of providing ease and direction in a time of sorrow. I've described the scene of going with my family to my son's gravesite for the unveiling of his tombstone, an event that took place April of 2015. I had been to the cemetery numerous times before 2015 and 2019 and participated in the annual Yazaret memorial of my son's death. However, in 2019, the preparation of the victim impact statements reopened every pain and wound from the murder. Although this is often a legal requirement prior to trial, it is a tremendous burden on the victim. These statements give the victims the opportunity to inform the court of their emotional damage and to demonstrate their suffering. The impact statement also gave our family the opportunity to tell the jury how special Dan was. This preparation brought out the pain of the old wounds, and the depths of my grief made me unsettled again. It was a very emotional experience because it brought me back to my intense, heartbroken feelings over the loss of Dan. Shelley, Phil, and I were each asked to write 2 victim impact statements to read in front of the court, one for the main trial and one for the death penalty phase should Garcia be found guilty. Composing these documents was a traumatic undertaking. I had to bring the more excruciating memories to the surface to ensure that the jury understood our loss. Quote, I had been forced to experience the unthinkable and to live a life filled with unimaginable pain and heartbreak that no mother should ever have to endure, unquote, I wrote. The victim impact statement dealt with the shooting and the murder, the defendant, the courts, and the trial process. This experience only added to the unwanted and unfamiliar ways of trial life. Although this was a new and unpleasant experience, we were well supported with information from Helene Potluck on April 30th of 2019. She wrote, let's focus first on writing your victim impact statement. As we discussed on the phone, there are 2 types of victim impact statements. In our victims' rights statutes under FS 921, every victim or next of kin of crime has the right to be heard before the imposition of sentencing. I have attached that statute for you as well as an informational handout with a sample letter to help you get started. The parameters are very broad here about what you may include in these statements. You should prepare 1 statement for Garcia's sentencing and 1 for McBenowa's sentencing. Other family, friends, and colleagues of Dan may also submit written statements to me prior to May 30th. I would then make copies for the state and the defense and submit a packet of the originals to Judge Hankinson on May 31st so that he has time to review them before sentencing. At the sentencing hearing, your family can either read your statement to the judge yourself, ask me to read it for you, or submit it in writing. But we try to limit the number of statements read aloud to immediate family and sometimes close friends. I've also attached some information about writing a victim impact statement in a death penalty case. This would only apply to Garcia's case. You will see the difference in the language for a victim impact statement that is presented to a jury during the penalty phase of the trial. The statute I attached talks about how your statement must be limited to Dan's uniqueness in the community and the resulting loss to the community as a result of his death. This statement must be written and submitted to me by the first week of June. I will then have our general counsel, Eddie Evans, review it before it's presented to the jury. We are limited in the number of statements we present during the death penalty phase, so I would like you to work on 1 or 2 statements from your family and 1 or 2 from close friends or co-workers of Dan. Then we can talk about whether you will read it to the jury or if you would like me to do so. Feel free to let me know if you have any other questions. My first phone meeting with you will be on Monday, May 6th, so we can talk more then. We received further preparation from Helene on understanding the penalty phase as follows. After the guilt phase of the trial has been completed and the jury of the 12 have unanimously voted to convict the defendant of the crime of first-degree murder, then the court will usually take a short recess of about half a day to a full day before starting the penalty phase of the trial. During the penalty phase, the jury first hears opening statements from both the state and the defense. The state's presentation of evidence must focus on the aggravating factors in the case. Florida statutes define a limited number of aggravating factors that must exist before the state may seek the death penalty. Aggravating factors include that the homicide was committed in cold, calculated, and premeditated ways, or that the homicide was heinous, atrocious, or cruel, or that the homicide was committed for monetary gain, just to name a few. The state may call witnesses to testify to prove each aggravating factor that exists in the case and/or rely on testimony presented during the trial. The state may also introduce victim impact evidence to the jury regarding the victim's uniqueness and the resulting loss to the community. This is done by family or friends or the victim advocate reading a prepared statement to the jury from the witness stand. The defense is then allowed to argue and present evidence about any mitigating factors that exist. They are not limited by statute and may argue anything they believe is relevant, which may include a defendant's family history, substance abuse history, mental health history, among other things. The attorneys will then give their closing arguments to the jury, and the jury will retire to deliberate a second time. The jury must be unanimous in deciding what, if any, aggravating factors the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt. They must then be unanimous in their recommendation for the death penalty. If all 12 jurors do not agree to recommend the death penalty, then their recommendation must be life in prison. Once they deliver their recommendation, the jurors are excused from service. The case is then scheduled for a Spencer hearing in roughly 30 days. At the Spencer hearing, the defense may submit any additional argument or documents in mitigation for the judge to take into consideration before imposing the sentence. The court will then schedule a sentencing hearing date 2 to 4 weeks after the Spencer hearing. At the sentencing hearing, victim impact statements may be presented before the judge imposes sentence. The victim impact statement is presented to the judge, not to the defendant. The statement can include the victim's feelings regarding sentencing in addition to the impact on their lives. The impact can be discussed on more personal terms. Unlike the penalty phase statement presented to the jury, which focuses on the loss of the community, this statement can focus on your loss and how your life has changed since your loved one's death. After the judge imposes the sentence, the defendant will automatically file an appeal within 30 days of the sentencing. April to early May of 2019 was a very tense period as there were numerous attempts by defense lawyers to postpone the trial. On May 6 of 2019, our lawyer from Gibson Dunn wrote Kappelman as follows. And folks, this is the actual document. She's got it. It's not just in type. It looks like a copy of the document here. It says, Dear Assistant State Attorney Kappelman, I represent the family of Dan Markel, his mother Ruth, his father Phil, and his sister Shelley. On behalf of the Markel family, I write to respectfully oppose any further continuances in this matter. It has been nearly 5 years since Dan Markel was brutally murdered outside of his home. After years of repeated delays and adjournments, trial is now scheduled to begin on June the 3rd of 2019. On April 30th, Defense Counsel Mr. Zangief filed his latest motion for continuance on the grounds that he is required to care for his pregnant girlfriend. While the Markel family appreciates that Mr. Zangief is experiencing the birth of a child in July, an event he has presumably been aware of since late 2018, yet conspicuously has never mentioned in connection with prior requests for continuance, we are compelled to respectfully oppose any further adjournments. At this late date, nearly 5 years after Dan's murder and more than 2.5 years since indictment, further delay would cause the Markel family significant additional pain and anguish and would not be in the best interest of justice. And they cite some case law there. The Markels have suffered unfathomable grief and loss. They continue to suffer, some in declining health, each and every passing day. Of course, no trial or verdict could ever heal the profound wounds caused by Dan's brutal murder. Maintaining the current trial schedule would begin to provide, however, the closure and justice that the Markels deserve. As your office and the court well knows, justice delayed is justice denied. The interest of both the Markel family as victims of this heinous crime and the public compel the denial of any further request for continuance. We believe it is important that the court hear the family's concerns before ruling on this pending defense motion, and therefore respectfully ask that you provide a copy of this letter to the court. Sincerely, Orange Schneider. Our task became more complicated because we had to write the victim impact statement for McBanawal and Garcia's joint trial. We were told we would have to wait for their sentencing and then enter another separate hearing for the death penalty phase. The victim impact statement should talk about and emphasize the victim's uniqueness, and Dan was surely unique. Nevertheless, I strongly disliked this process and still felt very vulnerable even with all the support. Our plan was to work with our lawyers to review our statements. Simultaneously to our personal writings, Gibson Dunn embarked on a major endeavor with our family. We provided numerous names of Dan's family, friends, and colleagues from around the world who were all invited to submit a victim impact statement. The summer of 2019 was very busy, as July 19th was the 5th anniversary of Dan's murder. By July 10th, we started writing drafts of family statements and had them finalized with Gibson Dunn for the release on July 19th as follows. Dan MARKEL was a light in the world. 5 years ago, Dan was murdered in cold blood outside his home, only hours after saying goodbye to his 2 young boys for what would be the last time. 5 years later, his friends and family are still waiting for all of his killers to be brought to justice. The MARKELs used to travel to Tallahassee to visit Dan and the boys at home, to visit their preschool, to play in the park, to attend music programs. Now, as they prepare to return to Tallahassee for the trial of some of Dan's alleged killers, they will be forced to relive the nightmare of Dan's murder all over again. The MARKELs continue to be grateful for the support of the Tallahassee community and the efforts of law enforcement, and they are counting down the days until justice is done. More than anything, the MARKELs want to reunite with their beloved grandsons, Dan's young boys, whom they have not been allowed to see in more than 3 years. By midsummer of 2019, I submitted my final draft and pushed to get it approved before the September trials. I wanted to have this task out of the way so I could focus my energy solely on the trials. There were 2 victim impact statements required for the trials in 2019. One is intended for the death penalty eligible conviction. Dear Judge Hankinson, my name is Ruth MARKEL. I'm Dan MARKEL's mother. Parents are not supposed to outlive their children. A mother should never have to bury her own child. Perhaps this is why there are words to describe someone who loses a spouse or their parents, widow or orphan, but there's no word in the English language for someone who loses a child. And yet, because of the terrible, heinous acts of a few, my son Daniel's life was cut very short, and I have been forced to experience the unthinkable and to live a life filled with unimaginable pain and heartbreak that no mother should ever have to endure. As the letters that this court have received from Dan's family, friends, colleagues, mentors, and others reflect, Dan was a loving, caring, uplifting, and inspiring person to everyone around him. Dan was a devoted son and family member, cherishing family celebrations and always making time for lengthy phone calls with me and other family members in Canada, United States, and Israel. As my son, everything about Dan and everything he did made me proud. From his love of music, dance, sports, and travel, to his dedication to the hard work in school, culminating in his acceptance into Harvard University, where he studied politics and philosophy as an undergraduate, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and Emmanuel College in Cambridge, where he earned a master's degree in political theory, and finally Harvard Law School, where he received his JD and began his impressive legal career. After graduating law school, Dan served as a law clerk for a deferral circuit court judge and then worked as an associate at a prestigious law firm in Washington, D.C. Dan then began what proved to be a successful career in academia, becoming a professor of law and landing a coveted teaching position at a top U.S. law school right here in Florida, FSU College of Law. Of all my son's accomplishments, however, I am most proud of the father Dan was to his 2 beautiful boys, Lincoln and Ben. It is hard to capture in words the joy and excitement I felt when Dan became a father and I became a grandmother. I derived even more joy and happiness watching Dan raise his 2 sons. Dan was a present, devoted, loving, supportive, and selfless father, and he always acted with his son's best interest in mind. Dan regularly attended the boys' daycare, leading holiday programs for all the children. Dan's office and home were covered with the boys' drawings, and the family's living room was always full of the boys' toys, regardless of the situation. Dan always put his children's safety and well-being ahead of his own. Lincoln and Ben loved their father. He was their hero. Dan offered the world his love, his wisdom and opinion, his energy, his friendship, and his warmth. Since the day he was born, Dan was alert and energetic. He did not waste this energy. He used it to live life to the fullest. For example, even in his short life, he pursued his passion for travel and lived in many cities, including Montreal, Toronto, Boston, New York, London, Jerusalem, Washington, D.C., Phoenix, San Francisco, Miami, and Tallahassee. He made meaningful connections with people wherever he went. He made friends all over the world and continued to stay in touch with everyone he befriended. When Dan moved to Tallahassee, he quickly became an integral part of the community. Dan made many close friends at FSU and in the broader Tallahassee community. He regularly attended community events and frequently hosted others at his home. Dan was on the board of the Shamrei Torah Synagogue and frequently attended services, holiday and children's programs. He was also involved with the Chabad community. Dan's murder has not only deprived his large network and community of a dedicated and caring family member and friend, but it has also deprived the world of a brilliant attorney, teacher, and legal academic. Dan was a prolific scholar in the area of criminal law and punishment and published a book on the intersection between criminal justice and family. Numerous articles in the nation's leading law reviews and opinion pieces for the New York Times, Slate, and the Atlantic, among other publications. Dan's scholarship on retribution in criminal law and sentencing was highly influential and is still widely read and cited today. Dan also co-founded a blog, Prof's Blog, which focuses on a variety of topics related to law and life. Due to Dan's amazing dedication and tireless work, Prof's Blog continues to grow and inspire legal scholars and students around the world. In addition to his scholarship, Dan was a devoted professor who was deeply involved in the FSU community. Dan was passionate about teaching, and his students adored him. After his death, over 200 students from the FSU attended his memorial service. Dan served on the law school's recruiting committee and worked to recruit high-level academics to FSU, including by personally hosting many of the recruits and new faculty members. Dan's energy, drive, and socially enhanced both the student body and faculty of the FSU College of Law. As the court knows, Dan's life was brought to a sudden, abrupt, and tragic end when he was murdered in July of 2014. The losses sustained and the damage caused by this crime cannot be overstated. In one fell swoop, my son, a brother, and the father of 2 young boys were all killed. My life was shattered. Dan's pain has caused me a deep pain that is both disruptive and permanent. After the death of a loved one, you're supposed to face the loss, the void, experience the grief, and maybe get closure if you're lucky. But when you lose a child, life's progression comes to a complete stop, and the grief and pain of a mother who loses her child never ends. For me, closure and normalcy are only words in a dictionary, not a reality that I will ever experience again. I've waited more than 5 years for those involved in Dan's murder to be brought to justice, which has only exacerbated my pain, my grief, my anxiety, and my health. It is very cumbersome to navigate and participate in the legal processes encountered in the days, weeks, and years following the murder. From the day I learned about Dan's death, I experienced a life sentence. But I know that even after justice occurs, Dan's murder will continue to torment me for the rest of my life. Our lives were destroyed as well. The lives of Dan's two sons, my grandchildren, were forever turned upside down as a result of this crime. Benjamin was 3 years old and Lincoln was only 2 years old when their father was murdered. Benjamin and Lincoln have been forever deprived of a relationship with their father. These boys have also been robbed of their childhoods as they were forced to confront and try to understand the heinous and unthinkable crime of murder at such a young age. My life as a grandmother was yanked away from me. My relationship with my grandsons had been put in serious jeopardy despite my request and unrelenting efforts to maintain a relationship with them. I've been denied any and all visits with Lincoln and Ben for the past 3 years, and direct lines of communications between me and them have been blocked. In fact, Lincoln and Ben have been completely cut off from their father's entire family. This situation has only added to the pain and suffering my family and I have gone through since the day of Dan's death. My daughter Shelley and her husband Ian have also been traumatized by Dan's tragic death and the simultaneous loss of any contact with their nephews. Dan's nieces and nephews, ranging from age 8 to 13, were forced to confront murder at a young age. Dan's older relatives could not comprehend this tragedy. My maternal 97-year-old uncle had a special bond with Dan and suffered greatly from Dan's murder. He gave up and died only 3 months after Dan was murdered. Of course, there are many more individuals not named here whose lives were devastated as a result of this crime. Respectfully, Ruth Markel. The second victim impact statement is written for what is called a non-death penalty eligible conviction. Dear Judge Hankinson, my name is Ruth Markel. I'm Dan Markel's mother. Parents are not supposed to outlive their children. A mother should never have to bury her own child. Perhaps this is why there are words to describe someone who loses a spouse or their parents, widow or orphan, but there is no word in the English language for someone who loses a child. And folks, let me just stop here. This is going to sound like I'm repeating it, but you've got to look for the differences in each one of these statements. And yet, because of this terrible, heinous act of a few, including the defendants in this case, my son Daniel's life was cut very short, and I have been forced to experience the unthinkable and to live a life filled with unimaginable pain and heartbreak that no mother should ever have to endure. I would not wish such pain and heartbreak on Miss McManawal or Mr. Garcia or anyone else who may have had a hand in my son's murder. This was particularly heinous and senseless crime. Murder is the worst, most serious crime a person can commit. The crime in this case was all the more tragic because an innocent good person was murdered in cold blood. The murder was not revenge for or related to some other crime, nor was it a sad but predictable event that could happen to someone living a life of crime. Dan was never involved in any criminal activity and did not put himself in dangerous situations or live recklessly. Dan was instead an upright, thoughtful citizen and a devoted father and loving son who lived a law-abiding life and productive life dedicated to teaching and helping others. As the letters that this court have received from Dan's family, friends, colleagues, mentors, and others reflect, Dan was a loving, caring, uplifting, and inspiring person to everyone around him. Dan was a devoted son and family member, cherishing family celebrations and always making time for lengthy phone calls with me and other family members in Canada, United States, Israel. As my son, everything about Dan and everything he did made me proud. From his love of music, dance, sports, and travel, to his dedication to the hard work in school, culminating in his acceptance into Harvard University, where he studied politics and philosophy as an undergraduate, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, the Emmanuel College of Cambridge, where he earned a master's degree in political theory, and finally Harvard Law School, where he received his JD and began his impressive legal career. After graduating law school, Dan served as a law clerk for a federal circuit court judge and then worked as an associate at the prestigious law firm in Washington, D.C. And y'all, I can continue on, but just looking at it, I think the only difference between the first impact statement and this one is they actually start talking about Miss McManawa and Mr. Garcia and how she does not wish any of this on them. It does pretty much state the same thing, but there were two different ones. Yes, it's pretty much the same, y'all, on that. Let me get to the part at the end where it is a little bit different. It says, while still processing and reeling from the catastrophic effects of this devastating loss, my family and I nevertheless appreciated the importance of and made it a priority to respect and to fully cooperate with and provide any assistance we could to law enforcement officers and the prosecutors handling this case. We patiently waited as this case wound its way through the criminal justice system. While no trial or verdict can ever heal the profound wounds caused by Dan's brutal murder, the time has finally come for the court to impose sentences on and to bring to a close the cases against Mr. Garcia and Ms. McManawa. Based on the seriousness of the crime, defendants' lack of cooperation throughout the case, the defendants' limited remorse, we believe that justice requires that this court should therefore impose a significant sentence on each defendant. Okay, so one of them, she's just stating things about Dan and what they've been through, and the other one is giving her recommendation. So there is the distinction there, y'all. Thank y'all for understanding that. Our lawyers at Gibson Dunn were very successful in organizing numerous victim impact statements from our extended family and Dan's friends and colleagues, which were all prepared and submitted on October 10th of 2019. Introduction to the trials. We headed into our period of waiting after the marathon of arrest. We endured this arduous waiting period from the arrest until the setting of trial dates. After Garcia's Arthur hearing in Florida, which is a bond hearing for very serious felony offenses, the outcome relied on the decision of the judge. For Garcia, the decision was for him to be held without bond in Leon County Jail. Garcia's lawyer at the time, Jim Lewis, said, "It looks like a weak case." The judge clearly disagreed because Garcia was not offered bond. He was still charged and would face a life sentence and the death penalty if convicted. Evidence presented in this Arthur hearing again relayed what we had learned about the state's evidence against Garcia, details about the Toyota Prius in the garage where Dan was shot, the same car that followed Dan to his son's daycare and the gym, and later went to a motel in Tallahassee. The shooting was not seen as a random act, and investigators established that the car was rented from a North Miami rental car agency, Hybrid Auto Rental Center, and driven to Tallahassee. There was a record from the SunPass electronic toll collection and security camera footage from surrounding buildings and city buses to prove where Garcia had been. The cell phone location was also a key finding included in the evidence for the trial. Dan was well known for holding an anti-death penalty position in his scholarly writing and on his Prof's blog, the blog that Dan co-founded in 2005, which had an international network. At the FSU Memorial, one of the previous students commented, "What would Professor MARKEL say now?" referring to the death penalty. In late 2014, this was a hypothetical question for our family. In 2016, it became very real. The Adelson family denied involvement in the murder by any family member. According to a statement issued by their lawyers, none of the Adelsons, Wendy or brother Charlie, or their parents Donna and Harvey, had anything to do with Dan's murder. Through their lawyers, they called any insinuation of their family's involvement to be fanciful fiction. The media had their first big TV production on September 16th of 2016, when ABC News aired In-Laws and Outlaws, a 2020 episode based on the murder investigation. The story of my son, the murdered attorney and legal academic, was all over international television news, print media, and social media. The 2018 developments were even more disappointed. After the previously mentioned delays, the trial of Garcia and McManawal was scheduled for October of 2018. But in September 2018, only a month before the trial, there was another delay until 2019. Waiting for the wheels of justice to grind is wearing. During this period, the defendant's pictures and fingerprints are taken and their experience of accountability begins. For the victims, this stage has a quite different feel and look. The victims are lost. To begin, I will describe my experience during the waiting period. I had a full array of players in my world, such as law enforcement officials who provided support with significant escort protection and criminal information. This is what it's like to live a life sentence. Waiting is the biggest part of that profile, filled with uncertainty, angst, powerlessness, suffering, and trauma. As mentioned previously, I was concerned that Benjamin and Lincoln could be at risk should the police arrive to take members of their maternal family into custody. Certainly, the regrettable release of my JAFCO memo to the defense attorney further complicated matters. During the post-arrest period, along with the numerous preparations and dates for hearings, I visited the Fort Lauderdale area for my winter break as I always had. The strain of being in Florida and not seeing my grandchildren, who were only miles away, was horrible. Luckily, I was able to visit JAFCO and their amazing grounds and programs while there. For their emergency services, they had several children's beds adjunct to the daycare facility. The staff, specifically Sarah Franco, the executive director, and Wendy Jenkins, the clinical director, were very compassionate and attentive. It was a relief to know that my concerns for Benjamin and Lincoln landed on very responsible leadership in this desperate situation. It was during this time that I resolved that I would not allow myself to become accustomed to not seeing my grandchildren in Florida. The situation was unacceptable, and I refused to accept it as a fact of life. The pursuit of visitation with my grandsons propelled me at the same time as my quest for justice for Dan's murder. This journey is self-motivated, but it is also driven by a feeling of responsibility to Dan, to ensure we tried everything possible to ensure Dan's family remained connected to Benjamin and Lincoln since his murder and did not just accept it when Wendy cut off contact. This quest for justice will be a continuous mission in my life. We had regularly sent presents and cards for the boys' birthdays and Hanukkah. We also sent Valentine's and Halloween cards to the boys, but we're not sure if they were ever received. I recall an earlier visit with Benjamin and Lincoln prior to the arrest when I brought them some of Dan's childhood treasures, specifically 2 of his freshly washed toddler blankets. I asked Wendy, "How do you want me to handle the blankets?" She responded, "Give them to the boys yourself." And I did. Wendy stayed in the kitchen as I brought Benjamin Dan's blanket. He clung to it. It was very meaningful for me and brought tears to my eyes. Benjamin had not had a chance to express how deep his grief was. It seemed as his response was profound and intense. Lincoln's response was appreciative. He placed the blanket on the bed with his stuffed animals and gave me a big hug. To my disappointment, on my next visit a few weeks later, the blankets were gone, and I never saw them again on my later visits. This disheartening situation left a permanent fear in me that our grandchildren might feel that we abandoned them. We had no idea what they were told by their mother or her parents, if anything at all. There would be no concrete evidence or memories about how we continuously tried to contact them. I was determined to make sure that could never be so. There are several TV shows today that highlight dramatic reunions of families. We're ready for our reunion and will be prepared with records of our attempts through TV appearances, media interviews, legislative advocacy, and of course, this book. My mantra to never give up and my determination always propel me to continue to the next steps. Florida grandparent visitation laws feel like the dark age compared to other American states and Canada. Much explanation is needed for people to comprehend the limited opportunity for grandparent visits in the state of Florida. Most people, including Daniel's legal friends, find these laws draconian. Nevertheless, there is strong opposition to making changes to the status quo, and powerful lobby groups work to block challenges to the strong natural parental rights of autonomy and privacy. As my life story unfolds, a life story I call Trauma and Gifts, I am continuously grateful to all of our legal friends, Matt Benjamin from Gibson and Dunn and his wife, who suggested I consider initiating legislation to challenge the law. Other American friends have also suggested that lobbyists are the way to go. Even before we embarked formally on these efforts, Dan's friend Jason Solomon started a Facebook page, Justice for Dan, which at that time was still in the embryonic phase and has grown significantly over the years. Jason boldly started an online petition and encouraged invited people to sign, imploring Wendy to provide us with the opportunity to visit our grandchildren in Florida. There were more than 1,000 signatures and a beautiful response that included many Canadian family members as well as friends and followers around the globe. Nevertheless, Wendy continued to refuse us access to the boys. Justice for Dan, this action-oriented platform, continued to monitor and share numerous other case developments. Web sleuths and other social media platforms have kept comments flowing on the absence of our ability to see our grandchildren. We continue to receive many supportive comments to this day. People are stunned and appalled by this situation, as shown by the words like these, quote, "Thinking of you, Ruth Markel, praying that justice is served and you are reunited with your grandchildren," unquote. Or, quote, "I was in college with Dan and think of your family often. I hope you'll be able to be reunited with your grandchildren soon and that justice will be served," unquote. Previously, my family had chosen a low profile on traditional media. We certainly broke our silence when the visitation restrictions to Benjamin and Lincoln were imposed upon us. Transition to the trials. During the pre-trial waiting period, I thought often about the various costs of murder. For one, there were the financial costs as a result of Dan's murder, detailing the types of expenses that the families of crime victims face. Attorneys, therapists, travel, and time away from work all add up. Then there's this emotional toll, which is even harder than the tangible financial costs and affects family members in varied and challenging ways. For example, Shelley, who is as focused on Dan's case as I am, feels that she has to take care of my needs as well, and conversely, I worry that no one is taking care of her. There's also the cost of good health, as mentioned. I developed atrial fibrillation while I learned that I could no longer see my grandsons. And there's the cost of lost time. not only the time you can never recover to spend with your loved ones, but also time with family members and friends, enjoying the normal connections of your social and emotional life. When you are immersed in a case, sometimes it's hard to concentrate on other parts of life that seems extraneous, but then you miss what passes you by. You get a life, as in you get to go on with living in the difficult times. These expressions such as move on, leave it behind you, and close the door on the situation do not apply. It is incredibly stressful during the pretrial waiting with continuous postponements. The long delays are not just measured in months, but years. Before the trial began, we were involved in a variety of hearings, subpoenas, and motions. We welcomed the activity after waiting for so long to get started, but the delays were not over. Before the jury had been impaneled, the trial date would once again be changed. Then it was set again and again. It was nerve-wracking to wait and learn who had been assigned as the judge presiding over the murder trial, and even more stressful to wait for the selection of a jury that would be making critical evaluations of the case. The judge assigned to the trials, James C. Hankinson, was a tough jurist who had presided over many difficult criminal cases during his time on the bench in Tallahassee. The prosecutors and the defense attorneys had great respect for Judge Hankinson, having argued a variety of cases before him over the years. It was comforting to learn that he had a reputation for being fair and had put away his share of murderers. While we were waiting, we sent information that we thought would be helpful to the TPD and the FBI. We managed the press, and as much as possible, we were polite. During the pretrial discovery, many more truths came to light. Meg Banawal was a top phone contact on Charlie Adelson's phone, and she'd been driving around Miami in Harvey Adelson's Lexus. Wendy contacted me right before the trial in 2019, which did not feel like a coincidence, given that she was scheduled to appear as a witness in September. During our conversation, I suggested she call Sarah Franco from JAFCO, who could further affirm what my communications with their organizations had been about. The following is an email I sent Wendy on July 25th of 2019. Y'all, this is fascinating. The mother of Dan MARKEL is sending Wendy Adelson this email. I didn't even know it existed. Hi, Wendy. I'm glad we had a chance to talk. Below is an automatic reply from Sarah Franco. I will also write her tonight with your phone number. Thanks, Ruth. We knew that Wendy was a witness at the scheduled September trial, and then in August of 2019, and sure enough, Wendy made contact with me via email. One of the most successful English TV shows is called Keeping Up Appearances, which is an apt description of Wendy's sudden interest in communicating with our family. She hinted that there could be more opportunity for us to create a contact. Hopeful for a breakthrough, I ventured into a pretrial phone call with her. Wendy told me she had a scripted message which she read to me on the phone. We did receive a picture of Benjamin and Lincoln going to the school in August. I was happy to see how they were growing up, as May 2016 was the last time I had seen them. Wendy behaved as though she wanted to make amends with us by offering to send videos of the boys, but only if we told Dan's friends and strangers to stop harassing her and making her life difficult. This was in reference to friends and their allies creating an uproar because while keeping her own children alienated from their father's family, Wendy had been working from an organization involved in humanitarian causes, including an advocacy to stop separating undocumented children from their families at the border. Y'all, is that ironic? Wendy's working to make sure that children are not separated from family, and here she is doing this shit? Sorry, y'all. Some of Dan's friends and strangers question why someone who wouldn't let her children see their grandparents should be considered credible to help other families reunite. Wendy emailed us stating that we were hurting her professionally and personally, which she said also affected the boys' lives. Wendy's invitation to be in contact, however, was not an offer for real contact. She suggested that we could exchange recorded messages and videos. There was no opportunity for direct contact by Skype or FaceTime. In other words, Wendy did not suggest that we have actual real-time communication with the boys, which meant that her offer gave us zero assurance that the boys would hear or see our messages at all. And this restricted offer was only words anyway, as she rescinded it immediately after she appeared as a witness in the September 2019 trial for Garcia and Magbanawal. Our assumption was validated that Wendy just wanted to be able to tell the jury and the public at large that she was in contact with us and making an effort to reconnect, but had no actual intention to do so. In fact, it got worse. Previously, Wendy had acknowledged the arrival of gifts we sent for the boys for their birthday and Hanukkah. Amazon would deliver the gifts, and I'd asked Wendy by email if the gifts arrived. She would answer yes. On October 13th of 2019, Lincoln's birthday, one day after mine, the trial had ended and there was nothing further from Wendy. It would be well over 2 years before we had any response or contact with her. During that time, we did not receive any notes of thanks for birthday and Hanukkah gifts, and so much time went by without communication with our grandsons. Y'all, that's pathetic. That is pathetic. I can't believe Wendy Adelson is employed at all the way she treated them. I'm going to try to get through chapter 6, y'all. Trial life in Tallahassee, courtroom life. Initially, some questions whether the trial would need to be held outside of Tallahassee became because of how many people knew about the case locally. Luckily, the jury selection wasn't as difficult as expected, considering the amount of press there was about this case. There had been some concern it would be hard to find jurors who are not already deeply familiar with the case, or to find individuals without prior relationships with Dan, Wendy, or any of the lawyers involved. As it turns out, Tallahassee may be a bit larger than its reputation suggests, and finding impartial jurors went smoothly. Kappelman asked potential jurors about their ability to evaluate evidence and their attitude toward its collection. Quote, "In the course of this trial, you may learn there are other folks who aren't these two or who have some culpability. Is there anything unfair about law enforcement conducting an undercover operation?" Unquote, Kappelman asked. The judge told the potential jurors that the case should last about 4 weeks and that they would not be sequestered. I watched Judge Hankinson's communications with the attorneys, the witnesses, and jury, along with the relevant sidebars, rulings on evidence, and verdicts on contempt of court with interest. The opening argument and early trial days were attended by Matt Benjamin and Sarah Kushner from Gibson Dunn. This was a blessing for us because they provided further explanation and a map of what was yet to come. We were given the roster of witnesses by Helene Potluck, who, as a victim advocate, was particularly sensitive to my desire to avoid being exposed to some of the more terrible images of Danny's murder. Because of this, I chose not to attend the first afternoon, which dealt with the police and the medical murder scene. I stayed in the hotel to avoid the horrid details of the first hours after the murder. But Phil and Shelley attended. Every gesture, comment, and facial expression you make as the family of a victim in court is scrutinized, you'll learn to avoid mistakes and to use the attention to your best advantage. Abe Heidenhang, my murder coach, gave us the following advice. By the way, You may not think it's important for you to sit in the front row of the visitors' gallery. It's not a waste of time. You have to be there since the members of the jury expect you there and indeed want to see that you care as much as they do. Remember, they are making less than minimum wage to sit there, says Abe. I was experiencing the day-to-day proceedings in Tallahassee's Leon County Courthouse. At this point, I was fully immersed in the trial life and was learning to play by its rules and apply the newfound skills I acquired. With the help of Abe, our ever-growing network of advisors, and our victim support advocate, I picked up further valuable tips. We were advised to sit close to the front of the room, but could only be in the fourth row behind the prosecutor's table, as the media took up the first 3 rows. We told several reporters that we would speak with them once the trial was over, so they were not chasing us around during the trial. We also came to understand how and when to react to evidence presented in court because the jury wanted to see how the trial was affecting us. We were very fortunate to have the support of our friends Ricky Bellman and Bailey Daniels. Phil's visitors included Max Hopt, Aaron Glassman, and Bruce McDonald. Sometimes they sat beside us, sometimes they positioned themselves so that they could see the jury. They debriefed us with their opinions at the end of the day. Our experience was augmented by the friends who visited. We were not alone in this stressful period. We discovered what not to say at the trial, even just in passing. We learned this lesson the hard way when our reporter asked Shelley her opinion about attending court during the high holy days, and she answered that it was hard to be there on the Yom Kippur and that she wished the trial could have been suspended for that day, as the judge had been previously announced that it would be. This simple remark led to several stories on the local news reporting that comment. We remembered to bring blankets in order to stay warm in the overly air-conditioned courtroom, and we knew to avoid eating from vending machines, as nutritious meals would give us strength for the hard days. Days in which we had to face the accused killers of our son, as well as a number of hostile witnesses who appeared to bolster their defense. This was our new normal. It was a surreal experience to see Garcia dressed in a suit and McBanawal wearing a professional-looking outfit with glasses. As the testimony in court took several unexpected twists, I had more questions than answers. I could not believe that so many answers from certain witnesses were incomplete and untrue. On prior occasions, McBanawal had been offered an immunity deal in exchange for information, but she turned it down. This surprised many, as McBanawal and Garcia had young children, and it was assumed that she would not want to risk a jail term. This added to our suspicions about who was paying for McBanawal's legal fees. Another bizarre strand of inquiry arose from an earlier finding that Catherine's sister-in-law, Samantha McBanawal, embezzled money from her job as at an accounting firm, parking more than $600,000 with a Miami spiritual healer. In some of Samantha's court documents, Dan's murder case was mentioned, including reference to how Samantha said she had been aiding Catherine with legal fees. Shelley, Phil, and I were ready to read our victim impact statements aloud, but at the last minute we were told that the judge only wanted to hear one of our statements, which I delivered. I was disappointed that our hard work had been put aside for the sake of expediency. The case came to a conclusion after 2 weeks of testimony. 2 weeks filled with suspense, high tension, and much rapid learning. We longed to take a breath outside the building while the jury was out, but we had to stay close as the court was reconvened for every question the jury asked. During the process of jury deliberations, jurors can ask for a meeting with the judge to clarify some of their issues. The jury asked repeated questions about the judge's instructions, especially his explanation of McBanawal's role and whether she should be defined as a principal of the crime or a participant in the crime. As the jury sent out its request, There were signs that the deliberations might be contentious, and it appeared that they were having trouble coming together in their opinions about her. In the end, the jury found Sigfredo Garcia guilty of murder, but a mistrial was declared in the case of Catherine McManawha. Polled after the verdict, it appeared that 2 of the jurors were confused by the judge's instructions and thought they couldn't convict McManawha under the guidance they were given. 10 out of the 12-person panel voted to convict her. Garcia looked grim as the sentence was read, and McManawha started to cry. It seemed that she thought her testimony would exonerate her. McManawha and her lawyer, Tara Kawas, were both in tears after the verdict. Of course, the media had made informal requests to us at the trial and formal requests to Matt or Gibson Dunn for interviews. We just wanted to hang in there and wait until after the trial for the sentencing of Garcia and McManawha. Updates on the ongoing trial and conclusion were shared simultaneously by Carl Eaters and J.D. Williams on Twitter. Web sleuths and other media platforms were full of comments as well. There were no loss for words. The trial had garnered opinions from all over the world. The period from May 2016 to September of 2019 was a long haul, with many delays until justice was on the horizon. We wrestled with the prosecutor's decision to seek the death penalty for Dan's killers, even though our son vehemently opposed this practice. On the advice of Gibson Dunn attorneys, who wanted to seek the harshest possible punishment as a negotiating tool, the prosecutor had pressed for the death penalty for the killers. We felt the irony of this, considering Dan's opposition to such sentencing. However, I was relieved that all 3 of us were invited to read our respective statements during the death penalty phase of the trial. When the jury handed Garcia a sentence of life in prison and not the death penalty, I was secretly comforted. It is what Dan would have wanted. Garcia went to prison to begin serving his life sentence, and Rivera went back to federal prison. Our newest and most unexpected dilemma was the mistrial of McManawha. This mistrial was a major setback and left us at a standstill. Still, this situation, the justice outcome felt frozen in time. The stakes were high and more waiting began. The trial of McManawha and Garcia ended on Friday, October 11th of 2019. The media was sitting in front of us, and we had said we would reserve comments until the trial finished. They were very respectful of our promise to comment. After the trial, they waited outside the courtroom, and Kappelman went out first to make her comments. When we came out of the courtroom, I kept my promise and promised to address the reporters. Quote, "We respect the process. There's a lot more work to be done, and we're looking forward and hoping it will be done soon. We want to thank all of law enforcement and the state attorney's office," unquote. The outcome of the trial was as follows. The judge, James C. Hanskinson, imposed a life sentence on Garcia and another 30 years for conspiracy to commit murder. Garcia's lawyer, Sam Zinkaya, said Garcia was still numb from the conviction and talked about the appeal process. Quote, "In a death penalty case, when you get guilty on first-degree murder, that's it. Your life is over," unquote, his attorney said. "You're either going to die of natural causes in a maximum security prison, or you're going to die on death row as a result of lethal injection." He also mentioned that Garcia did not take the stand because he didn't want to hurt Katie. He was very concerned about his testimony hurting or implicating Katie. But that's not all that his attorney said. After the trial, as well as in the media's interview down the road, he alluded to members of the Adelson's family, saying that at least 3 others should be quaking in their boots. When asked about this later, he affirmed that the 3 he was referring to were Donna, Charlie, and Wendy. Garcia's attorney made it clear that Garcia was opting not to cooperate based on what he believed was best for McManawha. A generous act, considering that her defense was complicit in the attack on Garcia for being guilty. In other words, Catherine's lawyers were clear during the trial, telling the jury that they believed Garcia had committed the murder, somehow having communicated directly with Charlie Adelson to do so. The dynamics between co-defendants are often complicated, and we learn that this is even more the case when the co-defendants have romantic connections and children together. We had prepared post-trial family statements for convictions and for acquittals, but we had not prepared for a mistrial. We had to regroup as a family to see the retrial go forward, but the setback was hard to cope with and created tension within the family. Shelley, Phil, and I were quite exhausted from the trial, and we had come up with another family statement. Thankfully, Shelley's husband Ian was there, and he made suggestions to keep us focused and complete the task in a timely manner. Social media coverage of the verdict blew up, as did the online commentary on sites such as YouTube and Court TV. We participated in series of media interviews, still carefully keeping the focus solely on our forced separation from our grandchildren. The jury participated in post-trial interviews as well, and members revealed more about the split vote for Magbanawal. It gave us hope that with some clarification, there was a good possibility that a retrial would bring a better outcome for us. The main question still stood: when will there be more arrests? October 12th of 2019, my birthday, occurred in Tallahassee. My thoughts were already on the reality that I was in Florida and my American grandchildren, Benjamin and Lincoln, lived in that state. We were still cut off from seeing the grandchildren, even after we clarified with a statement from the JAFCO that we had no intention of taking the children away from Wendy, only wanted to be assured that a plan was in place for what would happen to them if other family members were arrested. This was a day after the verdicts, but 2 days before sentencing. Garcia's death penalty trial would occur on Monday. That weekend was used by our family for some reflecting and rebounding. It was a special weekend for me because Saturday was my 75th birthday. I flashed back then to my birthday celebration just a few weeks prior to the trial in Toronto, when I made a very meaningful birthday brunch. I knew that after the trial I would not have the strength or interest for a social event. I planned my birthday celebration with the purpose of thanking my friends and family for their support. I prepared 2 cakes, one with Happy Birthday Ruth and one with thank you for all my guests. My talented Canadian grandchildren provided all the entertainment, along with a digital photo display of different periods in my life. Shelley created a beautiful scrapbook in which the guests could contribute greetings and photos. Y'all, this is making me want to cry. Y'all, I'm trying to be flat on this, but when I think about this, this just makes me want to cry. I can envision this, y'all. She's going through this. I will always treasure this memory. I wanted a celebration to take place so I could share my gratitude for this special group. In essence, my life has been filled with trauma and gifts. These people were all my gifts. Shelley and Ian had also had a big joint birthday celebration on Saturday before my Sunday brunch. Even though the anxiety-producing trials were only a weeks away, we enjoyed a fabulous celebration weekend. At the time of my pre-birthday celebration, we all knew major stress and uncertainty were around the corner. This flashback was on my mind on my actual birthday, that Saturday in Tallahassee. It turned out to be a day I'd never forget. An unexpected meeting. I often say that I'm a hairdresser junkie because wherever I travel, I find beauty salons in each city. The Tallahassee hairdresser scene was known to me as I had frequently visited Dan, so that was my birthday plan for October 12th of 2019. As I walked into the hairdresser, Fuel Salon, there was a young woman who jumped up out of her seat and asked, "Can I give you a hug?" She introduced herself as Dan's acquaintance and member of Tallahassee's small Jewish community and recognized me from the trial coverage that had been ongoing the weeks prior. "Can we meet for coffee?" she said. I said, "Sure, I'm free, and I have no specific obligations this morning." It turned out that Karen Halperin Cyphers would be one of the best gifts of my life, and not just my 75th birthday gift. Let me explain. She told me about how she and a group of friends had an intense interest in Dan's murder, the investigation, and the trial. Apparently, their involvement never waned, and they had been continuously on top of the investigation. We ended up meeting for sandwiches at a deli in the same plaza the hairdresser, we ended up at the meeting for the sandwiches at the deli in the same plaza as the hairdresser. Sorry, y'all. And she asked me, "What can I do for you?" I blurted out, "Grandparent alienation." She said, "Done." I had been sitting on a planted seed in my mind that I never nurtured. Previously, the notion of getting a bill written and the need for lobbyists was introduced to me on several occasions. I was always too preoccupied with my rights and experiences as a homicide victim, as there was a lot to learn about the American criminal justice system, let alone the stress of searching for justice. Advancing a bill just seemed impossible. Deep down in my heart, however, I knew I had to embark on this advocacy journey to see my grandchildren. It turned out that Karen was ready to roll. She'd been working in Florida's political process for 17 years at this point, as staff in Florida's Senate and House, as staff in the governor's office, as a contributor to Florida's eminent political blog, and in private consulting as a partner in public relations and public affairs firm, armed with a doctoral degree in public policy, relationships in Tallahassee, and a passion for justice in this case. Karen began mobilizing her networks to find a path forward. Y'all, you just think about that. Ruth goes in to get her hair done and just happens to get into this with this woman who's got all the qualifications that Ruth needs to even seek this legislation. By the start of 2020, Karen had organized all the moving parts, following a deep dive on the history of grandparents' rights in Florida and other states. She and her allies had connected with Senator Jeff Brands, who agreed to sponsor and to introduce a narrowly worded bill. Karen also joined forces with Jason Solomon, founder of the Justice for Dan, in order to mobilize not only the political process, but also the public's engagement in the issue. In 2020, the grandparent bill by Senator Brands was heard in one committee and passed unanimously. I prepared a video and family statement for this hearing. Quote, "Following the horrific murder of our son, Dan MARKEL, our goal has been to embrace his children, our grandchildren, and preserving the loving relationship they have had with us and the rest of their father's family," unquote. Dan's close friend, Jeremy Cohen, was there as a friend and as the family representative. He did a wonderful photo presentation of Dan and his family and also came through with a great speech. Jeremy would continue to show up, hearing after hearing in the coming years, never wavering in his commitment to see Phil and me reconnect with Dan's sons. Despite significant obstacles in terms of Florida's constitutional limits, and as mentioned, the lobbying efforts of one section of the Florida bar against us, our efforts didn't end there. Karen helped line us up with exceptional lobbyists, Jeff Johnston and Amanda Stewart, who agreed to take on our advocacy efforts free of charge. In 2021, even during the height of COVID-19, this team was able to secure a bill workshop in the Senate, led by committee chair Senator Lauren Book, where multiple lawmakers expressed their commitment to finding a path forward. Karen met with the staff of the governor's office, who also expressed their willingness to support our efforts. And at the time of this writing, we're in the midst of Florida's 2022 legislative session, blessed with the support of Florida House Speaker Chris Sprowls, as well as bill sponsors Representatives Jackie Toledo, Senator Keith Perry, who are advancing legislation to expand access to courts for grandparents such as us. These efforts resulted in refined and improved bill language over the years, a process that could not have been achieved without the collaboration and energy of so many. Karen's support to develop legislation for grandparents to visit will help children subjected to experiences related to violent crime. Legislation such as this will ensure that the best interests are protected in the process, could help grandparents such as me and Phil who wish deeply to be in their lives. See what can happen from a hairdresser appointment and a coffee with a stranger? Y'all, that's just so beautiful. I have to repeat it. It's just too beautiful for me. Ruth says this. She's asking everybody. In her book, she says, see what can happen from a hairdresser appointment and coffee with a stranger? Folks, I believe in the God thing. I just believe it. God bless her. God bless her. Karen's spirit continued to propel me as I piggyback on all of her initiatives. We have developed a tremendous personal relationship as we go through challenges together. All hurdles aside, we're still continuing on this journey. Instead of letting these traumas overwhelm us, we're trying to make positive changes. Phil, Shelley, and I are grateful that Florida lawmakers have introduced a bill advocating for grandparents following violent crimes to have a court hearing to see their grandchildren. Its success began as a long shot, and changing the tide in Florida, as in other states with similar draconian laws, will be a difficult battle. However, we miss Lincoln and Benjamin terribly, and we'll never give up on them. Dan would have wanted us to fight on. Back to the Saturday night. Shelley and Ian treated Phil and me to a great dinner in Tallahassee. Sunday was a quiet day around the pool. Monday was Garcia's death penalty trial. In preparation for the death penalty argument, Georgia Kappelman told the jurors that Dan's murder was reckless and callous. Kappelman told jurors that Garcia and Rivera had a chance to walk away from the murder, but they didn't, and Dan Markel didn't get a choice in any of this. Instead, she said, quote, his death was the product of a cold, calculated act driven out of pure greed, unquote. Garcia's death penalty. The jurors, family, media, witnesses, and general public returned to the Leon County Courthouse on Monday, October 14th of 2019. The closing arguments were set for the next day, and the jurors would make the decision on whether Garcia should be put to death. A unanimous decision by the jury would be needed. Garcia's legal team organized for a psychologist, Dr. Julie Harper, to be a witness to talk about his childhood mental health. Dr. Greg Pritchard was the expert for the state who argued in his rebuttal that Garcia's criminal behavior of 20 arrests could not be dismissed. The jury of 10 women and 2 men deliberated just over 40 minutes and returned with their decision against the death penalty for Garcia. After Garcia's sentencing, Kappelman said, quote, we will be going forward with McBanawal's case. The state will retry Miss McBanawal, unquote. At the end of the death penalty sentences, the lawyers discussed what would be the next steps for defending McBanawal and for appealing Garcia's life sentence. When the trial was officially concluded, we released to the media the following family statement. Danny was brutally murdered in cold blood. After waiting 5 long years, we're relieved that at least one of the people responsible for Danny's murder was convicted today and are grateful for the tireless effort of law enforcement and the state attorney's office. Yet, justice was only partially served today. In light of the mountain of evidence presented by the state's attorney's office, we are confident Catherine McBanawa will be retried and convicted. As all who followed this trial know, there is more work to be done to ensure that everyone responsible for Danny's murder is held accountable. Until that day comes, we will continue to fight for complete justice and to be reunited with our grandchildren, Danny's two young boys whom we love and miss dearly. While we were satisfied with Garcia's verdict, my family and I were dismayed by the fact that McBanawa would get a second chance in court. A new trial date for her case was scheduled for April of 2020, and I wondered how many more times I would have to recount the story of Dan's murder and what it meant for us as a family. It was clear that the court cases had become a carousel that would spin and spin, and I would have to find the strength again to sit through the evidence and another group of witnesses. Our final thoughts, shared by others, were gratitude for everyone's support and that the ordeal was far from over. We held on to hope that ultimately everyone who was responsible for Dan's killing would be brought to justice. Roster of witnesses, personal notes. The witnesses play a major role in providing evidence to the judge and jury. We were not disappointed, as most of the state's witnesses provided complex and informative evidence, although it was challenging to refrain from reacting to the testimony of witnesses who were clearly providing deceptive responses. Below is a roster of witnesses. Helen Potluck had provided us with the names of witnesses as they appeared each day. I knew few by name, and others I learned more about in real time. For the most part, I did not come into the trial with any preconceived notions about the witnesses who would testify. After the opening argument, the trial had a planned schedule, and early witnesses were selected to establish the medical and criminal evidence that linked the hospital reports and criminal scene to the same period as the shooting. The evidence, such as the injuries, cause of death, and time of death, was very disturbing. Vivid visuals were part of the presentation, which was too descriptive for me. As I mentioned, I chose not to stay, and I went back to the hotel. Phil and Shelley remained at the trial. And then she starts talking about these witnesses, y'all. James Geiger. One of the most important witnesses in the investigation and trial was James Geiger, Dan's next-door neighbor. The role he played was major, as he heard the shots and saw what appeared to be a light-colored Prius leaving Dan's driveway. James expressed major frustration with the EMS, who came 19 minutes later after his first call. James had discovered Dan in a pool of blood and was distraught about how long it took for the ambulance to arrive. His recorded 911 call was frequently played by the media, and in it he emphasized to the dispatcher, "You need to send an ambulance in a hurry. He's still alive. He's still moving." When I returned to Tallahassee in September of 2014, the FSU Memorial, I knocked on James's door to thank him, but he was not home. After that visit, I wrote him a thank you letter, but did not hear back from him until the trial. On occasion, there is a chance to leave the courtroom between witnesses at the trial. At the 2019 trial, I left the courtroom for a brief moment, and James was in the hallway and recognized me. He acknowledged receiving the letter, and I thanked him again. He turned out to be the main lead to the car and the critical evidence for the investigation. I will never forget his bravery in going over to Dan during the shooting. As I mentioned, we later sued Consolidated Dispatch Agency and reached a settlement after a lengthy delay. Our settlement was with the insurance company for $40,000 based on the delays in their response to the 911 calls when Dan was shot. And then she talks about another witness, Stuart Shazer, I guess that's how you say it, Stuart Shazler. We knew that Dan was alive after the shooting, and this was confirmed by David Sims from the Tallahassee Police Department as well as James. As mentioned in earlier chapters, I was on the phone with Dan before the shooting, but was spared the last few minutes because Dan wanted to make a call to Stuart Shazler. How fortunate I was not to be the person on the other end of the phone when Dan was murdered does not escape me. Many times I think about this unimaginable situation as I could have been the person to hear the shooting. Dan was looking for information about a charter school which Wendy was advocating for Benjamin. The witness, Stuart, was on the phone with Dan when Dan said that there was someone at his home he did not recognize. Right after hearing Dan say this, Stuart heard a loud noise and shallow breathing. He hung up and called 911. I can't thank Stuart enough for calling 911. Life has so many paradoxes. An unknown contact was now mixed up in the middle of this murder case. This is a real example of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, a situation that has now impacted Stuart's life. He has been a crucial witness in the investigation and Dan's trial. Craig Isom. Craig Isom from the TPD was not only the chief investigator in the murder, but also the lead contact with our family. As I saw him outside the courtroom where the witnesses congregated, I recalled many complex and fond memories. The most troubling memory would be our first encounter with Craig. On the Sunday morning after our arrival in Tallahassee, 2 days after Dan had been shot, we had our first meeting with law enforcement, specifically Craig. He gave us the details of the murder, including the murder scene. On that same day, Craig drove us to Dan's house to search for financial documents and other important personal evidence. Looking back, I do appreciate Craig's time and engagement with my family, particularly with me. The investigation and communication with law enforcement were part of what I thought of as my portfolio in our family's division of labor. Craig maintained phone follow-ups with me on an interim basis. He also helped us navigate the criminal system as victims. This became especially apparent when there were arrests and Dan's case became active with the state attorney's office. We had grown accustomed to Craig's caring and thoughtful communication with us, and we appreciated how he helped our family transition to our new victim liaison with the state attorney's office. On that same first day, July 18th of 2014, Craig had a lengthy interview with Wendy, which became highly publicized and elicited many opinions. The interview raised eyebrows, and people's opinions and impressions varied as to how much drama or truth was revealed by her. Now I'm back to the long-awaited trial 5 years later, watching Craig take the witness stand. Craig and the TPD obtained video of the Prius's route from the gym to Dan's residence. The TPD collected major evidence along with Patrick Sanford of the FBI. The evidence started with the type of car and moved to the information of the SunPass toll paying service and the car rental and the pawn shop tickets. Craig was also a crucial player for all the arrests. Craig and Patrick planned the timing and organized the arrest with other major criminal agencies and local police stations in the Miami area. At the time of the trial, Craig had already retired from the TPD. In his testimony, Craig was clear and credible. We will be forever grateful for his commitment. And I'm going to stop there, and my mouth's getting dry. I'm going to continue with the next part after this, y'all. There'll be more witnesses that is seen through the eyes of Ruth Markel, Dan Markel's mother. Leave your comments. Tell me what you think. I hope all of y'all are gaining some new insight. Justice through understanding means many different things to many different people. And KJ's learning a lot, and I hope you are as well. So leave your comments. I love you all. Be looking for the next one. And keep on looking.